Okay, all right.
We're almost at half a day, and this is amazing. It's just flowing away.
We are. I know it's going really fast. Well, it's already 3 p.m. in Toronto right now. We're right at lunchtime for the West Coast, and we have our panelists joining right now. Hi, Ivy, Jeremy. Hello.
Well,
hello.
Till we get a full group of people, maybe we can ask our participants if you're liking it so far. Just send us a thumbs up. And this is one of the most exciting panels that I was personally looking forward to, and one of the topics that we all want to talk about. Some of the people I've known personally, myself, Dee, Jeremy, and obviously Sherry, and I've heard a lot about you guys, and everybody wants to listen in on the topic of diversity and inclusion. So we are really looking forward to listening to you guys. So over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Romaine. Hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Jackson. You probably know me as Ms. D or Dopra. Welcome to today's career fair. I hope you're enjoying yourself. From the little I've caught of it, it's been really informative. And I just wanted to thank CanMar for putting this on today. You know, it's really important for us going through these challenging times to have some hope. And I feel that there's a lot of hope in the cannabis industry. So I hope you enjoy our panel. I'm joined by some really amazing colleagues, some of whom I've known for quite a few years and some who I'm just meeting recently. So I can't wait for them to share their stories and their experiences today with you. So I have a company called Divides, and my company specializes in consumer education and cannatourism. So I come from a background in hospitality and tourism, and I've been able to take that and combine it with my passion for cannabis in order to create a wonderful entrepreneurship opportunities for myself and for others. And so today, I thought we would talk really about our personal experiences in the cannabis industry, because as you may notice or not notice, we all represent different minority groups within our industry and our community. And so you can see by myself that I am a middle-aged Black woman and I've been involved with cannabis since 1977. So I have quite an extensive hindsight for my own experience. And it's very exciting today to be involved in an industry, in the legal industry, that while it still has growing pains, I do feel that we are an evolving culture, and that is apparent in our community and our industry. And so I thought we'd take a few minutes to just check in with the panelists, and I hope that they will introduce themselves and share a little bit about what they do in our industry and what their experiences have been like in terms of being minorities. And then we'll talk about some different questions. So how about we start with Jeremy, my friend Jeremy here. I'm so thankful for you all for joining us. And Jeremy, do you want to talk a little bit, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how long you've been in the industry and what you do and what it feels like to be a minority in this industry?
Sure. So my name's Jeremy Jacob. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I spent 15 years working in renewable energy systems before coming to cannabis. So I worked on hydrogen fuel cell engines with Ballard Power Systems. I worked in hydroelectric consulting, and then started a business in geothermal heating and cooling systems, and exited that in about 2013. So 2 years later, 2015, my wife and I started a cannabis retail shop in Vancouver called Village Bloomery. So, you know, as you can tell, I'm attracted to green industries. So Village Bloomery was there to create a new cannabis retail experience and to give access to the healing power of this plant to people who maybe didn't find a home in the other offerings in Vancouver. And there were about 30 at that time. So anyways, from there, we fought really hard. We got very active politically. I served as the president of the Canadian Association of Medical Cannabis Dispensaries. And for 4 years, I traveled around Canada. I spoke with the Senate. I spoke at conferences. I met president or prime minister and premiers and attorney generals and solicitor generals, and sat with a task force on legalization. So as a person of color, I felt incredibly privileged to have a voice in that whole process. So then we were able to transition successfully to the regulated market, and have been operating in this space now for, I guess, about coming up on a year. At the end of August, it'll be a year. One of the things that was very hopeful in the days leading up to legalization was, the presence of so many people of color in so many ways in the industry, and a real sense that, we were making change. We were making a difference, and we were working together towards a goal, which was the legalization of this plant. Post legalization, looking for hope. What we need, I think, is to see a concerted effort to create some functional changes to Bill C-45, which is up for review next year. And we can talk more about what those efforts might look like later. And that's my introduction.
Thank you, Jeremy. Nora, why don't you go next?
Nora, you're on mute. Nora, you're on mute.
There we go.
There you go.
My name is Nora. I started in the cannabis industry about 6 years ago. My first job in the cannabis industry was with Chiaro, which was back then Aura. And then in 2019, I joined the Emerald team. And when I was looking for employment in the legal space, one of the things that was important to me was to find an organization that had a large diversity in their leadership. And so when I had the opportunity to join with Emerald, it was fantastic. The leadership is very diverse, both in people of color as well as in the LGBTQT. And so it was just an easy choice for me to join Emerald. And excuse me, in late 2019, I started an organization called Louder Together with two beautiful women of color, Nicole Hines and Cindy Tran. And what the initial concept of Louder Together was to bring together people of color in the cannabis space to support their growth, to mentor, and to really provide opportunities for people of color in the cannabis space. Also to provide leadership development. We had our first event just prior to Lift in Vancouver. It was 7:30 in the morning and it was snowing in Vancouver. And we didn't anticipate it to be a full room, but it was a full room. 50 people came out to see a panelist of speakers discussing challenges of people of color in the cannabis space. And this was at 7:30 in the snow in Vancouver. And for those of you who don't know Vancouver very well, it very rarely snows. So snow is a very big deterrent for a lot of people. So at 7:30 in the morning, it was really beautiful to see so many people come out and talk about it. You know, what that evolved into most recently was a group of us from several different organizations, including Village Bloomery, Root Creative, Acres, you know, Mocha Catering. We all came together and we saw that there was a need for change in the cannabis space. And in 2017, when legalization happened, the government of Canada allocated $274 million to the RCMP for policing the Cannabis Act. As we know, RCMP and the Cannabis Act, it's very racially biased, let's just say. And so what we are currently working on as Louder Together is petitioning the government to reallocate those funds dedicated to the RCMP back into communities, back into community revitalization programs, back into harm reduction and education, back into supporting Black and Indigenous and people of color business development in the cannabis space. So that's what we're currently working on, and I'm very excited about it. And yeah, that was my entrance into the cannabis space, and I'm so thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. I'm glad you're here as well. Sherry, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I'm Sherry Boudram. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CanDelta. And if you were listening to the time slot before this, Dario from our team, one of our lead consultants, did a little presentation on our company. So as I was saying, I'm the CEO and co-founder of CanDelta. We're a regulatory and scientific cannabis consulting company. So we help with everything from licensing, just general regulatory consulting, site inspections, anything to do with regulatory, you name it. We have a very strong background in science. We're either have a PhD or a master's degree in one of the sciences. So we also assist extensively with any scientific matters kind of related around cannabis. So it could be anything from product formulation to lab setup and development. So quite a broad set of skill sets that we have here. So what do I do? So I lead the team, but how I really got into the cannabis industry was actually I started as a drug forensic chemist back in 2005. So don't count my age on that, but so in 2005 I started as a drug forensic chemist working for Health Canada. At the time they were only hiring chemists from the University of Toronto, and I happened to get the position there. So worked in government for a while, went back to school to do my PhD in chemistry, and then left, went back to government as a senior drug forensic chemist, and then got out of the lab, worked in policy for a number of years, and that included also working in as a senior compliance and enforcement officer for the medical cannabis program at Health Canada. So this was back when it was the MMPR regulations at that time. And then we transitioned to the ACMPR. I have seen a lot of change in the regulatory landscape over time at Health Canada. So I was actually lucky enough to be on the field, so able to still, do the licensing component at the pre-licensing stage, but also being down in the field doing site inspections of licensed facilities. So really gave me a really good understanding of not just what Health Canada sees, but some of the challenges that a lot of the license holders face when they're implementing a lot of these regulations in practice. So it was a really, really neat perspective. I did have the opportunity to leave government for a while working at a private company, more in the pharmaceutical space, but still outside of government. So completely left the public service life and got into private sector. And then during that time, I did have I would say that I was a pretty fair inspector when I was working at Health Canada. And I had a lot of, good relationships with a lot of the LPs at the time. So I started kind of doing work on the side, consulting on some of the aspects that they need some help with on the cannabis section, on the cannabis side. And that kind of snowballed into a bigger thing. And I was able to really start up the company CanDelta with the other partner that I have, Lucas, who's the other co-founder and also worked at Health Canada as well. So we started this company as a smaller startup, and then now it's evolved to about a 10-person company right now. And, with a full set of services. So that has been my experience in the industry. So it really happened, I would say, a little bit naturally, just kind of based on my background. And I think that, I really have a good fit here, and in terms of, my skill set and what I could really offer to the cannabis industry and help move people along and navigate the regulations and what is, really a challenging set of rules to navigate the industry. So it's, aside from the regulatory aspect, other parts come into play like advocacy, and we have a lot of clients that are finding their own challenges, especially based on where diversity is really evolved. And I see myself as hopefully, you know, somewhat of maybe a mentor, or at least being visible on a certain spectrum where, you know, you don't really see minorities in more of an executive role. And I think for me, we're probably going to get into this a little bit later on. I'm talking about some of the challenges that we have in the space as a minority. And I would say I see myself as a you know, a person of color, a woman that's a visible minority. I'm of Caribbean descent. My parents are from Trinidad, and you know, our culture is very diverse. With yeah, I see on the side. My culture is very diverse. I grew up with, you know, my parents and my grandmother lived with me, and my grandma's Black, and we always grew up with Black culture, Black food, and I really identify with my Black brothers and sisters in that community. So you know, I've had some interesting stories that have come to me just based on some experiences in that community that maybe when we talk a little bit more, we could get into that a bit. But so that's kind of my intro to the cannabis industry.
Thank you, Sherry. I'm glad you're here. Ivy, you want to finish up the introductions, and then we're going to get into the deep and dirty with the personal experiences.
Sure, Dee, but I think we would be leaving out Jordan then, right? Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, Jordan. I didn't mean to mistake you. Yes, Jordan. Yes, we're going to get to you, right? You're going to end it up. There you go.
Okay. All right. So my name is Ivy Zamuda. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Tantalus Labs. I also do a couple of other things in the industry in terms of value providing and advocacy. I blog at ivy.codes. And I've also recently put up a data platform at data.ivy.codes, which takes licensed data that's published by Health Canada and kind of does some visualizations. And one of the recent things I put up is a bar chart race showing the overall history of licensing since 2014, which is pretty cool to see how it was pretty slow at first and kind of sped up afterwards. I identify as a queer transgender woman, which is fairly recent news. I kind of have a high profile on social media, so that seemed to make some news for a while. Now, how I got into the industry proper was in 2018 when I started working for Tantalus Labs. But prior to that, I've been a medical patient for a long time, way back to the first iteration of the medical program. And then I've basically been through every iteration from the MMAR to the MMPR to the ACMPR to the cannabis regulations now, where it's actually just its own section in there. So quite a bit of history and just trying to keep up on all the medical regulations because there wasn't a lot of education for patients at the time. And like 3 different medical systems in probably 5 years, 7 years is a little much for patients to keep up with. So that just kind of led to being knowledgeable about the regulations, and basically tweeting a lot led me to my job here in Vancouver. I moved from Edmonton. Not the biggest move, but I never want to do that 12-hour drive again because that was quite awful. So yeah, beyond that, what I kind of wanted to cover first was that, you know, up until I think March or Feb, whenever I posted my kind of whole coming out thing, I wasn't perceived as a minority in the industry. So I think that gives me kind of a unique insight into, you know, how things can change in that kind of situation. And, you know, it's really been great that there hasn't been much negative feedback at all. But at the same time, you know, there has been a change from certain people and certain business relationships that maybe just happened to change coincidentally after I posted it. So I think that's one thing that I'll maybe expand on a bit more as Dee gets into questions. But overall, as a minority at Tantalus, it's been really good coming out as gender diverse, whatever that might look like. Probably the most stress you'll get is at your workplace because, you know, will they be cool with it? Will they say they'll be cool with it? But they're basically will look for ways to get rid of you. How will other people, react, because even if you put stuff into a code of conduct, like there are certain personalities that will just make life difficult for you. And if your management doesn't have the will to deal with it, you can be put in a really bad situation. And like, especially with COVID, like on top of the volatility in the industry, you can definitely feel trapped if you get into that situation. Luckily, that's not the case for me, but I've heard of plenty of stories from other people in the industry who are gender diverse who've had some really bad situations. So I'll maybe talk about that a little bit later too. And I guess the only other thing is that I was asked a lot in terms of, well, like, how's the reception? You know, did you encounter any negative feedback? And like, I really haven't. But I also like to be clear that those conversations are for sure happening behind some closed doors, and it doesn't really bother me. But I think we shouldn't pretend that those conversations aren't happening just because they're not public anymore. So yeah, I think that's all I want to talk about right now. Maybe throw it to Jordan.
All right, well, last but not least, thank you, Ivy. Last but not least, Jordan, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved?
Thanks, Danielle. My name is Jordan Brandt. So I work at Legacy 420 in Tyne-and-Egg territory here in Ontario. Currently, my title would be I'm the social media manager or marketing coordinator. But we're a small business, so you know I do whatever really needs done to help out. I've helped out with delivering supplies to places before. I do tours, for example. If we have customer education initiatives, I tend to head up those kinds of things. How I got into the industry, I started working for Legacy 420 in 2016. That would have been my formal entry into the industry. And prior to that, I was mainly an advocate for medical cannabis and a user of cannabis, both recreationally and medicinally. So 2016, I was working for Sears, actually, lifting boxes in a warehouse. And I went out to my reservation. I lived outside of Tyne-and-Egg at the time. And I had heard rumblings that there was a cannabis store opening up. And so I definitely went to check it out, see what was going on. And it had turned out that somebody I knew, somebody who used to grow for themselves personally, I would help them with trimming, actually, during harvest season. So he was actually the owner of the store. His name's Tim Barnhart. And so when I went there, I, who wouldn't want to work at a weed store? So, I definitely, kind of insinuated that, I might have interest if he was interested in, an extra pair of hands that he could trust, kind of a thing. And one thing led to another. And a few months later, I was working for him at Legacy 420. Started out as just a bud tender. And then it has pretty much escalated from there. In 2018, we held a concert of sorts, a very big Indigenous-led concert. We had 11 bands, Indigenous acts and bands from all over Canada. The Headstone, some of you might know, they were our headliners. So that was kind of one of my first big tests outside of just kind of some general store duties. So I was a big part in help organizing that. And then since then, I've moved into the position that I'm at now, where I manage our website, social media, etc. So Legacy 420 is, we're both a medical cannabis retailer and we're a producer of products. We are not federally or provincially licensed though in any way. So my my boss's intention when opening the store, and why I decided that I really wanted to be a part of this industry and here at Legacy in particular, is because my boss saw at the time that there was legal, at this point in time, 2018, legalization Canada-wide was imminent. Everybody kind of felt that coming at that point. And my boss anticipated that, there would be definitely a hole in those regulations, for lack of a better term, that that wouldn't have, you wouldn't see First Nations in Canada properly consulted or defined. So he took it upon himself to assert his rights, and took more of a sovereignty approach and stance on opening his business. And we've been in operation ever since. So some of you may or may not have heard, there is a bit of a proliferation in Canada now of unlicensed facilities on many First Nations. And actually it was in large part to the work of my boss, Tim Barnhart, that encouraged many people to, and many other communities to assert their rights and take that sovereignty approach to their businesses. So that's a little bit about who I am and how I got here, and I guess we'll get on with the rest of the panel now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for sharing that information. So we're going to try in the next 20 minutes to cover a few little topics. One thing I wanted to say, as somebody who has transitioned from the legacy to the legal industry, I can tell you in all fairness that, it hasn't always been easy in either side for me. Traditionally in our legacy industry, in my experience, it has been really a bit of an boys club. And as a woman and a licensed patient and a woman of color, I have felt like I've had extraordinary challenges. First of all, it's very hard to succeed in our industry alone. And so support is really important, not only from the community, but also from my colleagues in the industry. And the thing about it is about this table that we have and getting a seat at the table. And my experience has been that I've never really been offered a seat at the table. Any success that I've had to create, the opportunities I've had to make for myself, because I have not felt, honestly, that those were gifts from others. And so, since 2013, I'm preparing for legalization. I've sort of made it my own personal mission to welcome people to our industry. One reason is to increase our diversity, because the truth is our community, our culture of cannabis is evolving, and it's becoming as diverse as the plant itself. So you can look into a group of people, a wide range of people, and if you were to ask, who's the consumer, it could be anybody, right? It could be anybody from, a pothead to a patient, a hippie, a stoner, a connoisseur, whatever you call them. And this is very important to understand about the diversity of our culture, because our industry is driven by the consumer and should reflect that diversity, in my opinion. And so, unfortunately, as we move towards legalization, I saw that a lot of the same behaviors that were happening in our legacy industry were occurring in our legal industry. And that really bothered me, because really, I'm in this industry because I love cannabis. I believe in the plant, and I love and respect the plant. And so that's what drives me. When you find something you love, you want to share with others. At least that is my experience. And so that is what I've tried to do. And you know, in these times right now, as we're, you know, talking about equitable equity for everybody in our industry, I think it's really important to talk about this and talk about some of the things that we feel from our own experience could help to move us forward. So I'm really glad for these conversations. And, you know, one thing that I would hope for in our legal industry, like, yes, we are in our infancy and there are a lot of growing pains. The regulations that came out for our legal industry were not equitable, and they were not in our best interest, in the consumer's best interest, which to me should be the focus. There are people involved in our industry that are involved for a variety of reasons, and I put them in kind of two groups, you know. One group of which is looking to capitalize on the legalization of cannabis and make as much money as quickly as they can. And, you know, and then there's another group that work in the industry because they love the plant and they want to be involved with it in some way. And I tend to gravitate and resonate with those people. Doesn't mean that I can't work with other people. I've worked with lots of the companies, particularly in the last, you know, 6 or 7 years. Companies that have started up. But the thing is that, you know, ultimately my loyalty is with consumer and the plant. And so as an enthusiast myself, I feel that our industry needs to listen more to the consumer, the variety of consumers that are here, and not just go with, you know, what has been and what they think and their group that they think are the market, I guess. So I'm very grateful for organizations that are, you know, have been involved in our industry, in our industry, like, you know, Canadian Women Cannabis, and you know, Nora, the project that you're talking about. There's another one called Break the Stigma behind the scenes. And so I guess what I would encourage us is to think about, you know, why is diversity so important in our industry, and how can we help to make sure everybody's voice is heard. So with that being said, let's take just a couple minutes, make them brief, but let's share a little bit about our experience in terms of diversity and about why diversity and inclusion is important to us in the industry as individuals. Jordan, do you want to start? Since you were last time, do you want to start?
Sure. So my personal experience in the industry, you know, it's obviously probably a little bit outside of our other panelists here, not being in the formal or legal industry per se. So, you know, my experience is definitely going to be a little bit different, but I will try to relate to everybody else's experiences also. So personally, from, you know, more or less an outsider looking in, you know, I definitely am an active participant, but in a lot of contexts, I am outside of the industry looking in. So definitely from my personal experiences, and seeing how other people in the industry view and consider First Nations as well. It's definitely, I see a lot of positivity and I see a lot of encouragement. What I fail to see is, like some of the other people in the panel have pointed out, are supports or resources for people like myself. So if I were to want to get into the legal industry myself, the path in which to do so isn't necessarily super clear. I definitely have a lot of experience because I've basically been studying and watching and learning from the legal industry since it's been formed. So not necessarily with me specifically, but somebody else in my position. It definitely seems like it would be a difficult endeavor. And part of that is because, there's definitely a lot of preconceptions about somebody coming from a First Nation who's lived in and is from a First Nation, for example. So there's definitely going to be some preconceptions about that person's skill level and things like that. And even though the cannabis community is wonderfully diverse and definitely very inclusive, the cannabis industry, I think, is another story. And while they've tried to adopt that friendly persona and that inclusive persona, the truth tends to come out when you look at who owns these businesses, who is sitting in the boardrooms, for example. So that's been my personal experiences and some of my observations also.
Thank you, Jordan. Ivy, you want to jump in here?
Sure. So I talked about a bit of my, I guess, personal experiences since joining the industry. I'd like to kind of focus on something Jordan just said, because I think that the societal discourse on diversity has come a long way. But I think there's a danger with that, in that I think a lot of companies are just ticking the boxes. But as Jordan said, when you look at the C-levels, the board of directors, the people who are either making the big decisions or at the tables where those big decisions are being made, it's still overwhelmingly white and male. And that's not to be derogatory. That's, just something I think we have to call out. And I guess my own experiences, just to qualify what those are with that, is, going to conferences and just overhearing things and just getting the overall feeling that there's a perception that minorities should feel lucky that, employers are hiring them and, they're doing this minimal amount of effort. And I think that really needs to change, and it needs to be understood that they should have been doing this 5 or 10 years ago. And that's not enough anymore to just say, we're hiring X amount of these kind of people, that you have to empower them and give them a pathway to start bringing in their knowledge into the industry. Because we saw so many companies who were designing products for the white males that were running them. And these companies are now losing money hand over fist. And some of these companies aren't even in the market really anymore. So I think that's overall what I want to say about diversity in the industry. And I guess the only other thing would be, to what Dee said about how hard it is to make it by yourself, I think that's very true. And even if you don't see yourself represented at those power structures, or you don't see yourself, I guess, given the same consideration others are, you can easily find other people in the community who are. And this industry, although it has kind of matured a tiny bit, I don't want to give it too much credit. But there are still plenty of opportunities you can make on your own. I think what Sherry has done with CanDelta was a perfect example of, there was a huge opportunity at that time for a consulting firm, because it's not the right fit for every LP to have their own regulatory affairs department. If they're small and once they have their first license, it's not very complicated, then that might be all they need. So I think if you're looking to get into the industry and you're just worried that there's not a place for you right now, you have to really try and find those opportunities and just start taking up space and see what gets traction. But yeah, I think that's all I want to say. So I'll pass it back to Dee.
Thanks, Ivy. That you made some great points there. Sherry, would you like to carry on for us?
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. Yeah, Ivy brought up, I guess, just triggered, another point that I guess is worth saying, is the fact that I kind of created this company at an opportune time. And it's not that, and it's a good point too, saying that a lot of these, license holders don't necessarily have the bandwidth to have a full-on regulatory team, so they go out and get a consultant. But when I left government, I did apply to licensed producers at the time, and they had positions that were available at executive level regulatory positions that I've applied for. I did the interview, thought it went really well. It was very promising. And then the next thing you know, they hire the typical white male, and it's not, and whenever there's issues like this with, with diversity, it's never something that's very obvious. It's not like, okay, well, we didn't hire you because you're not a white male. It's because of some other, deficiency that they're saying that you're having. And me having a PhD in chemistry, when I went to grad school and all this, like, I always knew that being a minority would be a disadvantage to some extent in succeeding and going up in, in the professional level. And I knew that in having higher education, that's something that they can't take away from you, right? It's something that's on a piece of paper. You're certified, intelligent, that they can't say otherwise. I thought, okay, it's just as simple as this. Go to school, and then they'll know that they won't have those stereotypes against you because you have this piece of paper saying that you're an intelligent person. But it still doesn't work that way. You still go to these jobs and you have the qualifications, the experience, the background. But at the end of the day, you're still encountering a lot of the same challenges that you thought that you were avoiding. So I found that I didn't have a seat at the table. Those opportunities, even though they were there and they're present, they weren't for me. And, then I was thinking, okay, well, I got to create my own seat. And this is kind of one of the driving forces of starting this company as well. And thinking that, okay, well, I can do this and I'm going to do this. So that was really, I think, even though it seemed at the time that was something that was discouraging, it really does fuel the fire to help you to think of other ways to go about it. So that's, I guess, one point that I wanted to say. And I think Ms. D also brought up another point, and so did Ivy, about a lot of these companies not targeting their products to diverse groups. And I think that's very true. There's I think all these companies know that there's diversity and inclusivity. There's all these, corporate social responsibility, and there are all these buzzwords now, especially with all these, it's coinciding with a lot of social justice and awareness issues and Black Lives Matter and all these things. And it's actually a shame to see that the cannabis industry hasn't really been vocal on a lot of those fronts. You see it in a lot of other industries where they've mentioned, okay, we're going to do this. And even in fashion, oh yeah, we're acknowledging the fact we don't have many Black fashion designers or models and things like that. But the cannabis industry, I find, was very silent when all this stuff was happening. You didn't see anything on LinkedIn. And I thought that was very discouraging. And then, you don't necessarily, as a person of color, you always have this thought, should I say something? Because I don't want to be that disgruntled minority that's complaining. So, I mean, that's always a thought as well. But there's a huge minority market out there that is not being tapped into. And a lot of the producers don't know how to tap into that market. They know that, okay, we need to hire diverse people. We have policies in place. And it is a bit of a numbers thing, and they know that, it's going to bring about diverse ways of thinking, which again should increase your economic growth and have a larger market share, but they don't know how to target a lot of these minority groups. And there are a lot of minorities that would be open to the fact that, okay, maybe the cannabis is also a wellness product. It's not just about, getting high. And that's kind of the education, I guess, part that needs to be disseminated into a lot of these communities, and making them feel that they are welcome into the cannabis space and that their opinion does matter. Another point that I wanted to just touch on as well is that being a consultant, sometimes I get, and a person of color that's a consultant, I've had a lot of conversations with potential business owners that want to get into the cannabis space that are having a lot of challenges with things like getting investors or financial support, because they have their challenges of, presenting their business plan to essentially, I mean, a lot of people who are the ones who are investing are, white males, I guess, for lack of a better word. That's just how it is. and they don't necessarily want to, they feel like they have to prove their business model a lot more than maybe, you know, they have other colleagues that are, you know, a white male or, you know, different diverse background. So there are other challenges that I think come to light, and being in the position that I am, you know, hopefully I'm able to influence to some extent, but there's still a lot of work I think that needs to be done in the cannabis industry in terms of diversity and inclusivity.
Thank you, Sherry. Yes, I completely agree. Jeremy, jump in here.
Thanks. You know, we only have 2 minutes now, and we haven't had a chance to really have discussion from all panelists, so I'll try to keep it tight. Leading up to legalization, I spoke about hope. That's the era that I like to call the golden age of cannabis access. Whether you were a patient looking for information and products, or if you were a producer looking for somewhere to sell your products, this was the golden age of cannabis access. Now, we know that the history of cannabis has been a tool of oppression in the last 100 years for minorities and you know, people in a lower socioeconomic class. We've seen, you know, in the transition at cannabis conventions from pre-regulation to post-regulation, you saw this incredible diverse set of exhibitors at these events, people who were, you know, of different race, different economic backgrounds. Again, this incredible diversity, the golden age. We've seen now with legalization happening in the US, some US states providing provisions for minorities and communities who are disparately affected by cannabis laws to have a leg up to create some economic development within this sector. In Canada, we have not seen any attention paid to that by our regulators. So what we've seen instead is a cannabis bubble. You know, we've seen a set of regulations that essentially gave the industry to all the existing business energy that was out there. And as a result, we've seen a transition of the same ownership structure take place in cannabis. What we really need to see, and it's happening already, the market's self-correcting. As Ivy said, the big companies are losing steam and there are more small entrants coming in, but we still need to do more to increase opportunity and diversity in ownership of cannabis businesses, not in entry-level staffing positions. And again, one of the comments I made in the chat on the side was that there is no inclusiveness policy within Bill C-45. It's up to corporations to determine that. So for corporations, maintaining the status quo and saying, we're going to hire based on the most qualified applicant. Well, how do you define that? Because the most qualified applicant is going to be typically a white male who's had more opportunity to develop experience at a high level. So it just means the perpetuation of minorities being shut out of the boardroom. So I don't want to go on a rant, and I want to let Nora have a chance to speak. But before I do, let me just say that, you know, I don't say this to take away hope. I say this because this is the reality, and we need a reality check. And the people running these cannabis businesses also need a reality check, because the history of cannabis legalization has been about social advocacy. You know, look at some of the founders of this movement, like Jack Herrera. He marched with Black Civil Rights Movement leaders and you know, in his era. And we need to see the perpetuation of these attitudes and policies and efforts by our business leaders today. And yes, the silence, Sherry, from cannabis business owners in the midst of all this revitalization of the civil rights movement is loud. And it needs to be something that, as cannabis business owners, you're picking up a mantle, and you have to take that mantle seriously. Otherwise, I think you're going to lose the support of people who really care about this plant and really care about positive change.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. You just loaded with all kinds of good stuff in there. Nora, I know we're running over time, but take us home.
All right. Well, I just want to echo a little bit of what Jeremy said. The criminalization of cannabis 100 years ago was systemically racial laws coming into place. And, you know, minorities, Black, Indigenous, people of color have been targeted at rates of 8 times higher than our white counterparts, let's just say. So why has legalization left out the voices of minorities? Why has legalization left out the voice of Black, Indigenous, people of color? And so, you know, one of the things that is important to me, and also it's important to Louder Together, is that we believe in helping Black, Indigenous, people of color come to the table better equipped. Their voices being louder. You know, as a person of color, as a woman of color, first of all, as a woman, I have to sharpen my elbows twice as much just to even have a space. And then being a woman of color, that means I have to sharpen my elbows 4 times as much. So I'm disadvantaged twice. And I also recognize that I have privilege over other minorities, because I came in as an immigrant with open arms into Canada, and that wasn't the case for everybody. So, you know, I think really we have to look at the history behind the criminalization of cannabis and where we are today and what needs to change. And I think change comes at a policy level. Systematic racism stops at a policy level. And so that's what we are hoping to do with Louder Together. It's what we're hoping to do with the cannabis community. And I'll echo again what Sherry and Jeremy said, that the silence is deafening from the cannabis space, you know, and a lot of it is performative allyship, and which is really unfortunate. And, you know, things have to change now, like it's today.
I couldn't agree more. Jeremy, did you want to jump in there?
I did. I also wanted to say that pre-regulation, and in our shop especially, we met so many fabulous female growers. And I believe the intention and the care that they took and put into their plants and their tinctures and their topicals, it really, you know, I guess it's touchy-feely West Coast hippie vibes, but you know, that intention makes a difference in the outcomes for consumers. And the loss of that female energy, this is a female plant, you know, this is Mother Earth, and we need that back. I mean, we and this is what I'm talking about for next year. Bill C-45 is being revamped. As you know, small producers can't get into this industry without a fully built out facility. Banks aren't lending. Private industry is jaded because they lost so much, or sorry, investors are jaded because they've lost so much in the public offerings. And the well-meaning, quality-driven companies that are looking for investment now are having a difficult time. So we really need to see some fundamental changes, because I don't believe that our regulations are serving Canadians or serving the potential purpose that legalization of cannabis should represent.
Absolutely. Listen, I'd like to, this conversation is so big and so deep that we could just go on and on and on for hours, but I'm so grateful that we had a chance to just like even touch on the tip of the iceberg today. And so grateful for all the panelists for being here. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experience. And, you know, honestly, let's keep this conversation going, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to affect real change. So if you're new to the cannabis industry, understand that this is very topical right now and should be topical until those changes take place. So I'm just going to wrap up the panel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your career day.
Thank you so much, Dee. Well, Jeremy, Nora, Sherry, Dee, Ivy, thank you so much. This has been so inspiring. And, you know, it's one of the, like I said before we started, it's one of those topics that we definitely wanted to cover. And Next Leaf as a company have taken the initiative to put in a team, a task force to really do this. So, you know, slow steps, I mean, baby steps a lot of people are taking, but this is 2020, and everybody needs to realize we're sitting in 2020 and these changes need to come now. So thank you guys for all your time, wherever you are. Have a great weekend. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.